حبيبي سناه من عرض ربي قلبي له موئل يرعاه بالحب ترقيه عيني وتأبى للكرى سكنا ما لم اشرقت نفسي بنور من فؤادي.
Bilal was a slave. He was nothing. He was like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about man in the Quran, and he says, هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا. He says, wasn't there a time upon man that he did not exist? This was what Bilal Radi Allahu Anhu was like. Before Islam he existed, but in reality he did not exist. The truth is that a non-existence was more honorable than the existence of the slave amongst the Arabs. The historians mentioned that sometimes what they would do with the slaves is that they would tie him to a pole, and then they would bet with each other who can shoot the slave in his left eye. And they would shoot the arrow. The first would hit the leg, the second may hit the chest, the third may hit the neck, and eventually they would hit the eye, and the slave would be dying, bleeding his last, and the party who had won would be celebrating. As a slave, you were born a slave, you lived a slave, and you died a slave. You had no aspirations. But then Bilal radiallahu anhu left the servitude of man, the slavery of man, and became the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the example of Bilal radiallahu anhu is like the example of Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam from the depths of the well and placed him on the throne of Egypt. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took Bilal radiallahu anhu, a brutalized slave, downtrodden. And one day after Fajr Salah, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam turned around and he said, "Oh Bilal, tell me, what action do you do? Because last night I entered Jannah, وَسَمِعْتُ خَشْحَشَةً إِمَامِي, and I heard your footsteps in front of me in Jannah, O Bilal. I heard your footsteps in front of me, O Bilal." This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated him after he embraced Islam. His mother was taken as a slave, and he was sold to a man called Umayyah bin Khalf. Now Umayyah bin Khalf was one of the most ardent enemies of Islam. You know, you have in Islam those who have been guaranteed Jannah by the Prophet ﷺ. You also have those who are guaranteed Jahannam. One of those who were guaranteed Jahannam in the Quran was Umayyah bin Khalf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet ﷺ, do not follow this man. Do not follow this man, because he is a man that we have made his heart heedless. We have placed a seal upon his heart. And this was his master. And Bilal radiallahu anhu would often see how Umayyah, when he would hear the name of the Prophet ﷺ, he would froth from the mouth. He would froth from the mouth, he would become angry. But Bilal radiallahu anhu also noticed that they never had anything evil to say about the Prophet ﷺ. So Bilal radiallahu anhu went and he sat by the Prophet ﷺ. He wanted to hear about this message. And he heard this message, and it was a revolutionizing message. It was a message that even gave a slave hope. And this is why the vast majority of those who embraced Islam in the early part were who? They were those who were the slaves. They were who were regarded as the low people. So the deen that the Prophet ﷺ brought, it gave them hope. It gave the Muslims hope. And this is why the vast majority of people who came towards Islam were those who were the downtrodden. And the greatest objection that the mushrikeen had, what was it? The greatest objection that the leaders of Quraysh had, they said, we can't sit with the likes of Bilal. How can Bilal be equal to us? Abu Jahl would say, how can man like Khubab be equal to me? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, and he tells the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعِشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. He said, O Messenger of Allah, remain in the company, do sabr with those who remember Allah in the morning and the evening. Why? Because they want the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They want the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Bilal radiallahu anhu, he embraced Islam because this Islam gave him hope. And after a little while, Umayyah bin Khalaf found out about the Islam of Bilal. And the narrations mention that he tormented him. By Allah, if today the streets of Makkah could speak, they would tell you that this is the same place where you are walking today, where Ammar and Yasir were persecuted. And the Prophet ﷺ would pass by and he would rub his hand over the head of Ammar and he would say, Sabran ya ala Yasir fa inna maw'idakumul jannah. Oh Yasir, have sabr, because your abode by Allah is Jannah. They would tell you that this place is the place where Sumayyah radiallahu anha was martyred. If the streets of Makkah could speak, they would tell you that these are the streets where Bilal would be dragged until his skin would peel from his body. And then they would beat him with their sticks and they would pelt him with stones. And what would Bilal say? He would say, Ahad, one Allah, Ahad, one Allah. Then they would, in the sweltering heat, they would make him lie down. They would put armor upon him so he would boil even more. And then they would put a rock upon his chest and it would feel as though his ribs are being crushed. And then they would say, Oh Bilal, denounce your religion. And he would say, Ahad, Ahad. They would say, Bilal, believe in Lat and Uzzah. And Bilal radiallahu anhu would say, my tongue can't say those words. My tongue can't say those words. And Imam Halabi says, Bilal, he would dilute the torment and the pain through the sweetness of Tawheed. Aqad says, how did Bilal manage to physically take this torment? He says, because his heart and his mind was content. His heart and his mind was content. Bilal was unique. What made Bilal unique? By Allah, what made Bilal unique was that he remained steadfast in the most difficult time. Bilal radiallahu anhu could have easily said that, listen, I will embrace Islam when the Muslims are strong. He could have easily said that I will hide my deen. And when the Muslims become dominant, then I will embrace Islam. Then I will openly proclaim my Islam. No, Bilal radiallahu anhu remained firm. And Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says that the Muslims would be persecuted to the degree that they could no longer stand, that they could no longer sit down. They would break them. And every single Sahab who was persecuted would at one time or the other give in. And this was permissible. Ammar ibn Yasir radiallahu anhu came to the Messenger of Allah and he said, Oh Messenger of Allah, they persecuted me to a degree that I couldn't bear it anymore. And I said words of kufr. And the Prophet ﷺ said, how was your heart? And Ammar radiallahu anhu said, my heart was content with Iman. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if it happens again, as long as your heart is content with Iman, say those words again. And Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says that every single Sahabi, they tortured them to the degree that they broke them, besides Bilal radiallahu anhu. They would beat him and then they would say to him, is Lat and Uzzah your Lord? And finally they would say yes. At occasions, a spider would be walking past and they would say, is that spider your Lord? And they would say yes. He says the only man that they couldn't break was Bilal. The only man. Why? Because Bilal broke them. Every time they would say, believe in Lat and Uzzah, Bilal would say, my tongue cannot say that. And he would say, Ahad, Ahad. And the Prophet ﷺ would see this persecution. And one day he went and he said to the Sahaba radiallahu anhu, he said, isn't there anybody out there who can buy Bilal and free him? Look at the torment that he goes through. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was Abu Bakr. And he went to Umayyah bin Khalaf. And he said to Umayyah bin Khalaf, he said, send me Bilal. And Umayyah bin Khalaf said, yeah, I'll sell him to you because you're the one who corrupted him in the first place. So Abu Bakr said, how many? How much you gonna sell him for? And he said, I'll sell him for 10 gold coins. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu went home and he bought back 10 gold coins and he gave them to Umayyah. And Umayyah began to laugh. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu said, oh Umayyah, what are you laughing for? And Umayyah said, Abu Bakr, I swear by Allah, if you had haggled with me and you had offered me 1 gold coin for Bilal, I would have sold him for 1 gold coin. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu turned to Umayyah and he said, oh Umayyah, I swear by Allah, if you had haggled with me and you had asked me for 100 gold coins for Bilal, I would have given you 100 gold coins. I would have given you 100 gold coins. Abu Bakr bought him and he freed him. And then what would Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu say about Bilal? He would say, Bilal Sayyiduna. Bilal is my master. The greatest man after the Anbiya alayhim salatu wasalam to walk on the face of this earth is saying, Bilal is my master. Omar ibn Khattab would say, he said, Abu Bakr Sayyiduna wa ataka Sayyidana. Abu Bakr is our master and he freed our master. And then came the battle of Badr. And Umayyah bin Khalaf had no intention in participating in this battle. No intention. And one of the other mushrikeen, Uqba bin Mu'id, he went into Umayyah and he threw him a piece of coal. He said, go and cook like a woman cooks at home because you're not going to fight in the battle. You know, it's like saying, you know, go home and wear a skirt. Now Umayyah was forced to go into the battlefield. And Umayyah went into the battlefield. In every single battle, the Muslims had a slogan. Every battle. You know what the slogan in this battle was? Ahad, Ahad. One Allah, one Allah. This must have shook Umayyah. And after the battle, Umayyah was taken as a prisoner and Bilal radiallahu anhu saw him. And Bilal said, Umayyah Ra'sul Kufr, the pinnacle of Kufr. Ma najawtu in najah. I will not survive if he survives. Either he lives or I live. And he moved up. He pushed Abdurrahman ibn Auf out of the way and he struck Umayyah and he killed him. And whilst he was killing him, what did he say? Ahad, Ahad. One Allah, one Allah. You know, the Muslims had a concern, how do they call the people for salah? So many decisions were given. Some said put a flag, put every time it's salah time, put a flag up so the people see it and they come for salah. Some said use the horn. The Prophet ﷺ said that's what the Jews use. Some said use the bell. And the Prophet ﷺ said the Christians use the bell. So the Sahaba radiallahu anhu went to sleep. But there was one Sahabi especially. And this man went to sleep with a deep concern. 2 Sahabi. One was Omar ibn Khattab and the other was Abdullah ibn Zayd ibn Abd Rabbih. And whilst he was asleep, the angels came and they showed him how to give the adhan. And in the morning he went to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he informed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam of what he had seen. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called, who did he call to give the adhan? Who did he call? He called Bilal radiallahu anhu. Why did he call Bilal? They often say because he had the loudest voice. But I say that Prophet ﷺ called Bilal radiallahu anhu because he proclaimed Tawheed in the most difficult of times. And now he was going to proclaim Tawheed openly. By Allah, every single Sahabi would have given their life to have the honor of to be known as the Mu'adhin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Every single Sahabi. What greater honor could there be that you say Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says Allahu Akbar after you? What greater honor could there be that you call the people to Salah and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam lead the people towards in Salah? What greater honor could there be? The Prophet ﷺ said, he said a person who gives the adhan for 12 years, Allah forgives all his sins. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, a person who gives the adhan and all those people who pray with him, he gets the reward for all those people. Can you imagine getting the reward of the salah of Abu Bakr? the salah of Omar ibn Al-Khattab, the salah of Khalid bin Walid, the salah of Abu Ubaidah ibn Al-Jarrah, and all these eminent Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And the narration mentioned that Bilal radiallahu anhu, he didn't leave any children behind him. Actually, he left no wealth behind him. He died in relative poverty. But you know what the inheritance of Bilal was? It was the adhan. From generation to generation, the Muslims have adopted the adhan. And this is the sunnah of Bilal radiallahu anhu. From Australia to Canada, from China to Argentina, 1,000,000 times a day the adhan is given. 1,000,000 times a day the sunnah of Bilal is revived. But the greatest honor for Bilal must have been on the occasion when Bilal on the occasion of Fateh Makkah. Can you imagine? All the Muslims are there and all the mushrikeen are there. And the Prophet ﷺ asked the mushrikeen, he said, what do you expect from me? And they said, oh messenger, they said, oh Muhammad, you are Kareem. Your father was Kareem. Your forefathers were all Kareem. And the Prophet ﷺ said, اذهبوا أنتم الطلقاء لا تثريب عليكم اليوم. He said, all of you go. You are all free. And there is no reckoning upon you. And then can you imagine? All the Sahaba radiallahu anhum who were there in the Bayatul Ridwan were there. All the Sahaba who were participants in the Battle of Badr were there. The 10 who were guaranteed Jannah by the Prophet ﷺ were there. The 4 Khulafa Rashidun, 2 of them the son-in-laws of the Prophet ﷺ, 2 of them the father-in-laws of the Prophet ﷺ. But who did the Prophet ﷺ choose? Who did he choose to ascend the Kaaba? The Kaaba was the most holiest place in the eyes of the Muslims and in the eyes of the mushrikeen. Who did the Prophet ﷺ choose? He chose Bilal. He said, Bilal, stand up and ascend the roof of the Kaaba and give the adhan. Call on to Tawheed like you used to call in Tawheed under the rock. You used to call the Tawheed. In the state of persecution, you used to call Tawheed. Now today, stand up so everybody can see that Bilal is standing in top of the Kaaba and he is calling Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. But what was the Prophet ﷺ doing with Bilal? Think about it. He was showing a token of the society that he had come to create. That Bilal had left the servitude of man and reached the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how Allah elevated his status. The Prophet ﷺ could have chosen Abu Bakr, or he could have chosen Umar or Abdurrahman ibn Auf. He chose none of them. He chose Bilal radiallahu anhu. Because the Prophet ﷺ dealt with these issues of racism 1400 years ago. When Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu said to Bilal, Ya ibn Sauda, you son of a black woman. And Bilal radiallahu anhu got insulted and he went to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And he said, O Messenger of Allah, this is what Abu Dharr has said to me. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam called Abu Dharr and he said, Ya Abu Dharr, innaka imra'un fika al-jahiliyyah. He said, oh Abu Dharr, you are a man who still has the traits of ignorance in him. The pre-Islamic traits. And then the Prophet ﷺ said something really profound. He said, oh Abu Dharr, me Muhammad, I am equally the son of a black woman as I am the son of a white woman. Because the Prophet ﷺ was breastfed by a black woman. The Prophet ﷺ dealt with the issues of racism 1400 years ago. And then in another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, listen to this. He said, whoever calls to the call of Jahiliyyah, he will be in the fire of Jahannam. And the Sahaba said, in Sama wa in Sallah. And the Messenger of Allah said, in Sama wa in Sallah. They said, even if he prays and he fasts. The Prophet ﷺ said, even if he prays and he fasts. Do you know who the wife of Bilal radiallahu anhu was? She was from the Quraysh. She was the sister of Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the 10 who was guaranteed Jannah. He was a multi-millionaire. Multi-millionaire. And his sister was the wife of Bilal radiallahu anhu. And throughout the life of the Prophet ﷺ, Bilal radiallahu anhu remained in the company of the Prophet ﷺ. In journey or at home, he was the mu'adhin of the Prophet ﷺ. In every single battle of the Prophet ﷺ, he participated. And when the Prophet ﷺ was ill, final illness, the narration mentioned that Bilal radiallahu anhu would often give the adhan, and then he would call the Messenger of Allah. The Messenger of Allah hadn't come out, so he went to call the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he saw the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam that he was becoming conscious and then unconscious. He said, "What grief?" He said, "What grief?" He said, "I wish my mother had never given me birth that I see this day, or that I had died before seeing this day." And then when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam passed away, the narrations mention that the Prophet ﷺ's body was still not buried, and Bilal gave the adhan. And when he reached Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, often when he would reach this state, the Prophet ﷺ would come out of the house which was adjacent to the masjid, and he looked and there was no messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the narration mentioned that Bilal began to choke, and he began to cry, and all those around him began to cry. And for the next 3 days, Bilal radiallahu anhu tried to give the adhan. Every time he would reach Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, he would begin to choke. And then he went to Abu Bakr and he said, "Abu Bakr," because he couldn't bear to remain in Medina without the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, "Abu Bakr, allow me to leave, because I heard the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mention the virtue of jihad. I want to do jihad." And Abu Bakr said, "No, Bilal, you stay with me. I need you." And Bilal radiallahu anhu said, "Abu Bakr, if you freed me for yourself, then keep me. But if you freed me for the sake of Allah, then let me go." And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu allowed him to go, and he went into jihad. And then one night, Bilal radiallahu anhu was sleeping, and he saw a dream. And in the dream he saw the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, "Oh Bilal, what is it that you never come to visit us?" And he woke up and he traveled towards Medina at a hurried pace. And when he reached Medina, he lay on the grave of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, remembering his Habib. And Hassan and Hussein came and they said, "Oh Bilal, give the adhan." And it was a request of the grandchildren of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Bilal radiallahu anhu got up and he gave the adhan, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar." And the narration mentioned that Medina erupted. It erupted because it brought back the memory of the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The men and women came out of their house, they were ripping their clothes, tearing their hair out, because it reminded them of the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Bilal, he tried to stay in Medina, but he found it difficult, because everybody where he would see, look, it would remind him of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he couldn't bear to remain in Medina, and he left. And then came the occasion of the conquest of Masjid al-Aqsa, and the patriarch said that I will only give the key to Omar ibn Al-Khattab. And Omar Radi Allahu Anhu traveled from Medina to Masjid al-Aqsa, and all the Sahaba were there. Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, Shurahbil ibn Hasana, Khalid bin Walid, Muadh ibn Jabal. And they went up to Umar and they said, "Oh Umar, request Bilal to give the adhan." And Umar asked Bilal to give the adhan. And the narration mentioned that when Bilal reached Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, those beards of the Sahaba, when they embraced Islam, which were black and now had become grey, they became drenched with tears. There was no Sahabi whose beard was not drenched. They had to console Umar ibn al-Khattab, because it reminded them of being in the company of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this was amazing virtue for Bilal, for he gave adhan in the Haram in Makkah, in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and also in Masjid Al-Aqsa. All three of the most holiest places. And then when Bilal radiallahu anhu, he passed away, and the narration mentioned in Damascus, he was passing away. And his wife said, when she was passing away, she said, "Wa huzna." She said, "What grief, what sadness." And Bilal said, "La." He said, "Say, wa farha." He said, "What happiness, what happiness." غَدًا سَأَلْتَقِي مُحَمَّدْ وَأَصْحَابَهُ. He said, "Tomorrow I will meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions." Can you imagine? Can you really imagine? Now, what kind of iman? Wallahi, you're dying. You're leaving this dunya, and you're happy to leave this dunya because you want to meet the message of Allah. When the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir," that the dunya is sijnul mu'min, is a prison for the believer, and the Jannah for the kafir. The ulama write, why is it a prison for the believer? Because it stops him from meeting Allah and His Rasul. It's a prison because it doesn't allow you to meet Allah and His Rasul. And it's a Jannah for the kafirs because this is all that they have. And can you imagine the state that you are dying? You are dying, but you are happy to die because you want to meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Bilal radiallahu anhu passed away in the 20th year of Hijrah. He is buried in Damascus and his grave is still there. Many people go and visit the grave of Bilal radiallahu anhu. Upon occasion, a group of people came to the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they said, "O Messenger of Allah, marry our daughter to somebody." And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "What about Bilal?" And then they came again, and they said, "Marry our daughter to somebody." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "What about Bilal?" And upon the third occasion they came again, and they said, "O Messenger of Allah, marry our daughter to somebody." And the Prophet ﷺ said, "What about Bilal?" A man of Jannah. A man of Jannah. In another narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-Jannatu mushtaqun ila Bilal." Jannah longs for Bilal. We long for Jannah, and Jannah longs for Bilal. Upon occasion, the Prophet ﷺ finished the Fajr Salah, and he turned around and he said, "Oh Bilal, what is it? What action do you do? That last night I entered into Jannah and I heard your footsteps in front of me. What action do you do?" And Bilal radiallahu anhu said, "The only action that comes to my mind is that whenever my wudu breaks, I do my wudu again, and I pray 2 rakats." This was a man who was persecuted for deen, the most severe persecution. He did jihad. He was the muazzin of the Prophet ﷺ. But why were his footsteps in Jannah? Because every time his wudu broke, he did wudu, and he prayed 2 rakats. And this is why sometimes we think actions as insignificant, but they are very important because they are the foundations. Your salah is your connection with Allah. There was never any Sahabi who did not pray their salah. The truth is, when they prayed their salah, they were connected with Allah. They reached that state of ihsan. You know, the life of Bilal radiallahu anhu is an inspiration to us. It shows us how, in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can be regarded by society as nothing, but you become close to Allah and Allah elevates you. And you look at Bilal radiallahu anhu, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated his status. And this is what deen does. Deen doesn't look at the person's color or his wealth. It looks at your virtues.